So what you just heard, those two readings from Luke, in the theater business, we call that a story arc. Two things that seem to be connected, although they're not technically connected in a chronological way, but they are thematically connected to one another, right? We have this scene. Jesus, in both cases, lamenting over the state of things in this sinful city, the city that has lost its way. This, of course, comes to the apex when Jesus begins to weep. And it's important to understand, Jesus is not just shedding some tears here. This is grief. This is weeping, mourning, uncontrollable emotionality. This is Jesus at his most human, mourning the state of a city. Why? Because as Jesus looks down on the city, he understands that it is a city that would not know the ways of peace. He does not say they couldn't know. They wouldn't know. There is a distinction. They are willingly blind, blinded by their desire to choose things that are comfortable and profitable and powerful over those things that make for peace. Over centuries and decades, we have taken the clarity of Jesus' messages around peace and we have turned them into a bizarre labyrinth of politics, personal motivation, ideological conflict. We have turned the most basic political processes in our nation into blood sports, while we export our violence to the rest of the world. We turned peace into some mystery that we can't seem to figure out. We turned it into some complicated idea, something that we have to have meetings about and talks about, and all these fancy people have to get together to figure out how it works. And we never get there. We never achieve it. That's a choice. We do that. We did that. And then Jesus comes along. And Jesus makes it very clear, folks, I have a very particular ideal about the idea of violence that I will never, ever, ever surrender to any argument ever. And that is that violence, this disjointed community, this perversion of religion, these things are fundamentally anti-Christ. They are fundamentally anti-Christian. Because Jesus comes to us to talk about the very ideal that we would eventually reject. It is the ideal that is the foundation of our creation, which is inherently peaceful coexistence with one another. God creating humanity in peaceful community, love embodied, peaceful love breathed into the dirt of your creation. A love so profound, so big, so beyond us that we still mess it up every single day. And we ask ourselves, what are these mysterious things that make for peace? Jesus must be talking in riddles about this thing called peace. I don't know if there's anything Jesus can be more clear about, folks. The things that make for peace are not a secret. Jesus is not hiding the cards here. Because from your creation, from the moment God breathed into the dirt, to the moment God liberated the slaves in Egypt, let them cross the parted sea, from the moment that God sent the tablets to Moses to establish the peaceful order of not a religious community. And all they've ever done throughout the history of our faith is ask us to do two things: love God and love each other. That's all. That's the baseline. That's where it starts. That's the easy part. That is the part that has been part of our absolute ethos from the beginning of the story of our faith. From creation to liberation to the law that brought the order of love, how to love your neighbor, how to love your God, the law that we then as humans twisted into something it was never meant to be, a tool for our personal spiritual violence in service of our own motivations and our own biases. The things that make for peace were made clear in the liberating power of God throughout the Old Testament. The God who liberates, the God who saves, the God who brings order to nothingness. And the voices of the prophets will carry that same message. From Elijah to Micah and beyond, they will all be preaching. How do you love God? How do you love one another? You do it by justice, through equity, through the creation of harmonious, peaceful society. And I will tell you where it begins. It begins with the simple recognition that you are not in this world alone. That things are happening to people and they matter because they are happening, not because they are not happening to you. The injustices that some suffer, we may never see, but we should still care about them. We should still carry the pain and the brokenheartedness of them. Because we live in community. We are connected by God's intention that we live in community. This past year, I became a Benedictine oblate. I live by a very strenuous Benedictine spirituality, and I believe that the spirituality teaches us three fundamental things that are necessary for peace. The first is always, always, always to be focused on the way of community. What does it mean to be a community? What does it mean to listen to one another, to see one another, to lift one another up? The second, humility. My God, could we use a dose of humility? The reality that your relationship with others does matter. Your relationship to God does matter. And you cannot enter the world in a state of supremacy and expect to create peace. And the third one, the one that I know here at Scipioville we preach the most, radical welcome. We are a people bound together in spirit and in mission to promote peace and to work for peace. And in order to be a people of peace, we must welcome everyone through the doors who dares to come here, regardless of their race or their politics or their love. And if we are not going to do that, you need to either stop using the word welcome or put an asterisk next to it so you can explain why it's not real. Father John Deere, a major activist in the world of nonviolence and anti-gun violence, tells us that the first step in creating peace is calming the violence that lives inside of us. It is understanding the parts of us that respond to the world with anger and with vengeance and for a need for retribution. The parts of us that, frankly, find the Old Testament God a little jazzy sometimes, right? A little smiting never hurt, right? But this idea, right, is that we too feel those impulses, the impulses to destroy in response to things that cause us pain and hurt. And John tells us not to do it. We are in the season of Lent and Easter when Jesus becomes the focal point of the church again, at least some of them. And what Jesus brings with us is something that, if any of you know me well, you know I am a Mary fanatic. I love that woman. I quote her all the time. I preach about the Magnificat all the time. And the Magnificat is a perfect example. Mary's prophecy to the world that everything was about to change, that violence would become peace, that injustice would become justice, that the least would become the most, and the most become the least. She preached that gospel, the gospel Jesus would preach in his life, his ministry, his death, and beyond. We stand here today, a people about to follow an infant who became a man, who will walk his way in quiet and dignified suffering from the mockery of justice to the blood of the cross. And on that cross, Jesus will single-handedly take away the power. Jesus will overcome the things that made him weep on that hillside, the things that we refused, the things we will be made to confront as nations and peoples and communities. Jesus drags to that cross with him through the streets the sin and the darkness and the violence and the appetites and the things we do to one another, drags them to the cross and leaves them there. They are dead, ghosts, shadows of the past that cannot hurt us anymore. And this peace, this radical, disruptive, disorienting peace, and I hope, friends, it disorients you constantly. This peace that Jesus would proclaim without words in a cradle in Bethlehem, this peace that Jesus would proclaim as rabbi and teacher, this peace that Jesus would take with him to the grave and resurrect on Sunday morning. This is not an old story, folks. I know we like to pretend that we are so far removed from our hillbilly ancestors beating each other with sticks. But the city that kills its prophets is still very much alive. The nation that rejects truth is still very much alive. The people willing to destroy one another for the sake of political power, influence, ideology, for the toxic need to be right, more right than others, not just right, victorious. That city is still very much alive. And you don't have to take my word for it. Turn on your cable news for 30 seconds and watch as the people engage in an act of verbal violence in constant repetition. So today I leave you only with an invitation. I leave you with this invitation. I believe that the things that make for peace are embedded in the Presbyterian ethos. I believe the Reformed faith lifts up the things that make for peace, letting Jesus be the head of the church, understanding that we worship, that we develop our faith and our sense of justice in community. The idea, the crazy idea, that we could be wrong. I know that. I'm wrong at least 40 times a day. Ask my husband. But I don't want any more programs about peace. I don't want any more meetings about peace. I don't want any more resolutions about peace. I don't want any more overtures about peace. I want people to begin the work of restoring peace in their own lives, in their own communities, and in your own congregations, because we cannot conquer the world, but we can change this corner of it. Lean into the principles, the ways of peace, the things that make for peace. Forgive one another, love one another, lift one another up, celebrate the gifts of one another, take time to experience grace and give grace. Make justice your sacrifice. And for God's sake, pray for peace. Because these are not obscure ideas. These are not mysteries to us. These principles were written on your heart the moment God whispered to you before you entered this world. Community, humility, radical welcome, grace, love, and justice. They have always been here. Jesus is just asking us to remember. Amen.